Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-host Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is Brian Mullins from the Black Community Collaborative. You may have seen his face in the viral videos about the migrants in Chicago. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you. You know, your buddy Natasha was on a while back talking specifically about that, but I wanted to talk on a more, on a broader basis on everything that's going on in the city. You know, there are a lot of issues going on in all the big cities, and they all seem to be struggling. And New York, where I am, and Chicago seems to be at the forefront. So I wanted to talk about these issues, compare and contrast, and then talk about how we fix this and where we go politically.
Gotcha.
So I guess I should start with the two cities. They've been in the news a lot. It's almost as if Brandon and Eric are battling on who can snatch the national headlines, not necessarily in the good way, and who can do the craziest stuff, right? So I guess I'll start with what's the most recent one. The most recent was Brandon Johnson in a press conference when he's being pushed on the migrant issue and all the problems and the crime and the carjackings. And he's like, look, it's hard to do this. You know, I got a family to raise and I got a black wife and black kids. You know, so don't be questioning me about my job when I got black kids. And then Eric Adams says, you know what? You know why they hate me? Look at my cabinet. Look at this. You know, I got a black chief of staff here. I got a black woman here. The first Hispanic person here. That's why they hate me, because look at all this color. There's so much color in this. How exactly, and you're about as pro-black as they come, but how does that help the cities operate?
It doesn't at all, right? And it's actually a hindrance to progress, to true progress like we want to see. Coming from Illinois, we have a black lieutenant governor, black county board president of Cook County, black mayors, black head of public schools and housing authorities, and every single slot down the line. And think in 2024, we're not allowing that be an excuse for us. We're not allowing it, right? Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of what we consider failed black elected officials here in Chicago and in Illinois. And it's now coming to pass. I think all over the country is going to start to see this kind of, implosion of the traditional black elected official, because they're not able to contain the black masses anymore. So we're part of these movements just to get the word out and say, hey, we need to have actual progress, just not stuff on paper. So
we could get to some of the specifics of what they're doing, but let's just start with what he's basically describing as window dressing. The fact that, you know, we got these people in place, so that should be enough. We need people that look like us. And a lot of the people who would used to defend it, they can't anymore. When I made these comments 5 or 6 years ago, they would say, yeah, well, it's the system. So there's only so much they can change, like back when Barack first won. Or they'll say, well, they've only been in for a couple of years. But the people that he's mentioned, I've been in New York, 4 years? Well, they were in office before I left. So the Cook County Board President, Tony Preckwinkle's been in office for, 11 years, right? These people aren't new. And up until recently, the city council was majority minority. So Will, what are your thoughts as to, one, I guess, why people still lean on it as that's all we need is to get us in office, and as long as we have people that look like us, that's going to make a difference, and how they're able to, like Eric Adams and Brandon Johnson, to just wave that wand as an excuse, and then when they get criticized for their bad performance.
Well, I mean, I think, for everyone that watches the podcast, I mean, I try to be a pretty objective guy. And I mean, I think when you look at the facts, obviously, there are a lot of mediocre to failed black leaders in power in big cities. And I will say, just like there are a lot of mediocre to failed, kind of ethnic white leaders in power in these cities historically. I mean, it's not like, Boss Tweed or the second Mayor Daley or somebody you couldn't accuse of corruption. It's not like Big Rod Blagojevich didn't have some people sniffing after him up there in Illinois. Right. But I mean, it just objectively focusing on our group, yes, just clearly speaking, like Brandon Johnson is not doing an extraordinarily good job. And I think because there's been so much racial sparring historically in the United States for a whole bunch of reasons, one of the things minority politicians do when they're in that situation is say, well, yeah, they're coming after me because I'm a black man, got a strong black wife, got a black chief of staff. Not really. I mean, today the city's a third black. I mean, most of the urban Irish and Italian, Mexican guys in the city don't hate black people. No, people are coming after you because taxes are high, rent's really expensive, crime's through the roof, and you don't seem to be doing shit about it. It's really obvious what's going on. So yeah, I think people are really tired of that deflection. And yeah, I'm glad that you're one of a number of black leaders, Hispanic leaders that we've had on the show who've said we want actual solutions in these communities. And it's good for me to hear that. I mean, I lean to the right, but it's good to hear that from the right or the left. And just like the last sentence, obviously, the shit's not getting done. I mean, when you look at some of these areas, like, I mean, I'm from Chicago. You know, I've lived on the south side, I've lived on Wicker Park in the north side. Like, I've lived in the actual city much of my life. And I mean, when you look at the crime rates in these areas, I mean, there's a movie made called Chirac.
Right.
You know, so if someone says, well, I'm going to reduce crime, and crime in Chicago is the 8th highest anywhere in the country, you're not accomplishing that. So yeah, I think it's absolutely fair for the black taxpayer or the Hispanic American taxpayer to look at a politician and say, oh, we put you in power, we're your boss, to reduce criminality in the city, and you didn't do that. There are only 7 cities in the country that have more crime. So yeah, of course people aren't mad at Brandon Johnson because he's a black man. His predecessor was a black woman. Right. You know, the city electorate is 60% minority. No, that's not the issue. Yeah, so it's good to see people calling out the problem, whether the mayor is black, white, whatever.
Yep. And I think also, if I can add to that, if I can, we also were coming out of in Illinois, we were under this 30, 40-year reign of Speaker Michael Madigan and then the second Mayor Daley, like you mentioned. So we operated under the Democratic Party. So there was no black interests. There were no black politicians. They were all green, right? Now, so they all ran under this banner. Now, Madigan got indicted in a federal case. And so now the black elected officials have morphed into the political left that they have been battling since 2014, 2015, when Karen Lewis took over the teachers union. Rahm Emanuel came in for a second term. So we now see those same black elected officials voting with Brandon Johnson and the political left, which is just crazier because they really are not in the best interest of our communities at all on multiple levels.
Well, I want to talk about that. We talked about them using the black as a cover, and Will made a good point that they might not be doing a great job, but there's white politicians that don't do a good job as well.
Right,
100%. Right. I mean, there may be a difference because we can argue that they're not saying, well, I'm in office because I'm white. They're not using that as a refrain. But that aside, correct me if I'm wrong, because I was gone when he won, so I wasn't there. But Brandon Johnson feels different. No matter what you thought of Rahm, no matter what you thought about Lori Lightfoot. Lori Lightfoot was different from Rahm in some ways, but similar in other ways. Brandon's a whole different animal. I feel like Lori Lightfoot was the very kind of like the gateway drug into the left. Like she was kind of liberal. She would always tout being black. I'm a woman, I'm a lesbian. So she would sound like that on the surface. But, you know, she was a practicing attorney. She was a partner in a law firm. You know, she was still the kind of person, the city that works kind of person. Brandon has her same political left views, but he doesn't seem to know anything. So that seems so. Am I wrong in that assessment? But that's what it looks like.
No, one of the problems with Brandon Johnson is Brandon was an organizer for Chicago Teachers Union. Then he taught in school for like
never gave enough. Let's not forget that. He bragged about never giving enough.
And never gave homework.
He's never given an F as a teacher?
Oh, he bragged about it. Will, he's like, I have never given a kid an F before.
And he didn't believe in homework.
That's crazy.
And test. Right. So he didn't teach the kids to test. He didn't give them homework and he didn't fail any of them. So we can.
He didn't teach them. Right.
Right. And didn't teach any of them. Right. So Brandon.
He didn't do a whole lot. Yeah.
No. And because of the political prowess of Chicago Teachers Union, if you guys are aware, which are, is they have been dumping tens of millions of dollars into electoral politics. So they've been running candidates since 2014, slates up and down the line. Now they're starting to get victories, right? That's why we now see about 7 or 8 progressive aldermen in the council. But that's how Brandon got elected, right? Now, in the Brandon campaign, it made it worse because, Brandon won 52 to 48%. Now, that is not a sweeping victory, seeing as they brought in the whole left army into Chicago from Bernie Sanders on down.
And
He
what was the
barely
turnout,
won.
by the way? I'm assuming it was
Low.
low.
It was in the 30s. I don't quote me on it, but it was
Which
a
is
low
good
turnout.
for them.
Good for them, but it was a low black turnout.
Yeah, right,
so it's funny because the numbers that actually elected Brandon came from the north side of Chicago, which is not black, but they blame us like it's our fault, even though we didn't show up to the polls. Mainly, I believe, because there were some problems with the Vallis campaign where the outreach money didn't reach our community. So most people just didn't engage in the election. It was kind of a dead cycle. And people knew, a lot of people, and that's the knock on Brandon and the teachers union and all their tentacles. They are not they're not elected officials, but they're not policymakers and they're not administrators. So now you have union organizers, along with all their favorite not-for-profit CEOs and all this, basically trying to figure out how do we make more money in the not-for-profit sector. They're not trying to administer government like Rahm, Daley, and Lori's people. To your point, Charles, that's a great point. Lori came from the Daley side, so she still had, like them or not, government ran, right? And then there was a way for us to keep pushing on it. What we're seeing now, it seems to be a failure at all levels, and it almost looks like it's a calculated failure in some of these issues. I'm sure we'll get to, from ShotSpotter to education and some of the initiative in schools, from taking the police out of school. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So yeah, I think that's the difference. I think they are just inexperienced, and they do what they want to do. They've put us out of City Hall for the first time. People been coming to City Hall, protesting. Now that's another stage just happened again today. They put the black protesters out, but we had Palestinian and Israeli protesters fighting in city chambers, and they didn't get put out. But we got a black mayor, right? I mean, this is what all kind of convolutes for us on the ground here in Chicago. It's kind of crazy.
And you make a good point. You talked about some of these topics we're going to talk about, but I think the way I want to lead into these specific topics is to talk about something that you and I talk about a lot. And so I get into the not so much like Will's the Twitter master. I kind of watch stuff and just like, what's the point? These people won't get it either. And every once in a while, I'll say something and then they prove me right. They don't get it and I let it go.
Right.
And so I think that people vastly misconstrue the black electorate in the sense that Chicago's unique. So maybe I'm looking at it from a Chicago lens because that's where I came from. But you made a good point where they would say, blame you for Brandon, even though he got votes from the north side. They'll say, well, you all, when your viral video went out for the migrants, they'll say, well, you all got what you voted for. And I made it clear. I was like, well, I'm not saying they were right to not vote, but a lot of people didn't vote at all. So you're assuming that they're just going and pulling the D all the way down. And some people just fed up with what's going on and they don't vote. So that's one thing. But they're right in the sense that most blacks tend to vote Democrat when they vote. Mm-hmm. But what I think they miss is they think that equates to the left. So talk a bit about how you see, you are obviously, we can get into your ADOS beliefs, your pro reparations, your all that stuff. You're not some right-wing conservative, but you realize who the true enemy in the community is, and tell us who that is politically.
It is definitely the progressive Democrats. So no ifs, ands, buts about it. I think that's the worst enemy that we have in our communities right now. Coming from Illinois and Chicago, we have 40 years of every layer of government, from the governor on down to our local elected officials, are all Democrats. Bruce Rauner came in for 4 years. They beat him down real quick. He left back out. But other than that, every single level is Democrats, right? So I think it's in Chicago and everywhere around the country, people are finally starting to wake up. I hate to use that word, but they're waking up, to what is really happening by watching what's happening, especially in this immigrant situation coming in all over the country. And let's be honest, in our community in Chicago, it starts with no civic education in school. So once you pull civics out of school, you start to lose that little thing in there. Then you have no direct outreach. Even right now, we have an election coming up March 19th. The only vehicle set up, other than us, and we're small because we're still trying to organize and raise money to compete at that level, is the Democratic Party. So we just can't mobilize like other communities can, because we don't have those. Chicago Teachers Union funds 42 separate community organizations based around homelessness, healthcare, and education. they then, rev those groups up for issue-based organized during campaign season. Right. We don't have those mechanisms in place as a Black community to get to the same place. Now, we know how to get there because of our experiences, but we just haven't. And it's usually about money because they get funded from governmental programs, Chicago Community Trust, all these foundations give them money for their deeper agendas. Their agenda is not to push Black America, right? And so everybody's like, get out of here, do it yourself. You're just too lazy. Work harder, Brian. I'm like, well, we work hard, but you also got $50 million. Can we help us out a little bit? And that's, I think, the biggest struggle is that it's hard to mobilize and galvanize a base of voters around issues with no infrastructure money to pay organizers, to pay people, and to move it like every other group does that move people. So we're trying to get there. I think that's the strategy. But to your point, I voted green, I voted red, I voted blue. I vote for who I believe is the best candidate in all the races, right? Mm-hmm. And I do see, it really feels like there's going to be some changes. Now, I don't know if it's going to be in March and November. You have some, Turn Chicago Red movements here. Mm-hmm. I think they're okay on the surface, but it's a lot of work to be done. And the reason I don't say Turn Chicago Red is because I don't feel the Republican Party is offering or doing anything for us either, right? So I'm from the angle of, hey, we don't want to move people from one to the other. We want to try to leverage the move for some resources. And now, as you all know, in Illinois, we spent, they just announced today, another $350 million county in the state of Illinois going towards the migrants. That puts the total at $1.5 billion going outside, just going away. And we still want some of it, right? And we're in budget session in Springfield, just so you all know. So we'll be down there next week battling them for the budget address, saying, hey, can we get our share finally for our people? And that's all we ask. It's not a hatred against other people. I mean, that's all another combo. But to your point, Chicago is, and we're 15% of Illinois, 30% of Cook County, 30% of the city of Chicago. And we look at that as give us our share, right? But it equates to $25 billion if that ever did happen in reality, right? And that's a fair, equitable share that could help communities. It doesn't work and nobody really wants it. So you got all this constant fighting. Now the progressives, to your point, they were the fighters. I was with them. I was a senior consultant on Chewy's campaign, and I worked with these same people that are now in office. They thought like I did for a while. Then I left when I realized they don't act right. But now they're in control. But what they're doing in Chicago, and I don't think this is happening in New York. Maybe it is. You guys tell me. But they are acting like fascists. Now, when I say that, whatever the community wants, they say, no, we're doing it. We want to vote on Sanctuary City. No, we want police in the schools. No, we want, we want spot shotter. I mean, I don't go get to the spot shotter conversation, but Brandon's handpicked superintendent says, I want spot shotter because it's a good tool for police fighting for the police force. No, we're getting rid of it. So, we're in a crazier place because I don't believe, but you tell me, your mayor is not such a leftist that is he pushing policies that are just disenfranchising all races and everybody in Chicago. Is it the same thing going on there?
No, he's definitely different from Brandon in that sense. He's more a cult of personality. He more likes his ego and that kind of thing. But the one credit I will give him is that on the things he's a leftist on, he's an open leftist and he's proud of it. And on the things he's not, at least they're not pushing him. So he's somewhat pro-police. He doesn't necessarily make all the moves that I would make, but at least vocally with his bully pulpit, he's saying, no, we're not going to do this. I want to get to Will and get his response to the way Black view these issues, not just from voting, but on the issue basis and what the left is doing. But real quick example, I was talking to you about right before I left Chicago, they passed that ordinance. No, it was before that. It was a few years before. It was after Laquan McDonald. They passed the order where they had to do the walk sheet. So every time they stop somebody for any reason to have a conversation with them, not even if they're holding them, they have to do this paperwork. Of course, the police like, I'm not doing all this extra paperwork. They didn't have that in New York, right? So just a couple of weeks ago, they were trying to pass it in New York, and they voted on the council and it passed, and Eric Adams vetoed it. Told them it was crazy. It was going to make the public less safe. It was going to hurt the police, and asked them to do ride-alongs with the police to see what they do and why it would be foolish to write down something every time they stop somebody.
Right.
And some of them agreed to do it. And then the guy from the Central Park Five. One of them's on the city council, and he got pulled over, and he got all mad and said, "Well, now I'm not going to do the ride alone," and they overrode the veto. So it's stuff like that. Like Brandon will just be down the line left. Eric Adams, it kind of depends on the situation.
On this. Okay, great.
But Will, what are your thoughts? You're still on mute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was making sure my mic wasn't muted. Yeah. Eric Adams and Brandon Johnson, I think, are very different guys. Eric Adams, I think, in fact, is struggling with the crazy left in his city. And I mean, for the record, like I'm not from New York. New York's a great city, but I'm from Chicago, but background, I live in Louisville now.
Right.
So we have kind of a smaller scale version of a lot of these same issues. But Adams, I mean, he's a former cop. He was a decorated cop. I think when he went in, he kind of wanted to do a lot of public smiley face to left-wing issues in the way Barack Obama sort of did, but just keep the city running. And he was surprised by how serious people were about some of this bullshit. And you can just tell the disgust that he feels sometimes, like, they're shipping buses full of motherfuckers from Nicaragua to New York. Like, what? You can just that working class, like New Yorker, like, what are you doing? Yeah, so I think those are completely different guys. With Brandon Johnson, I actually think, Brian, you made a point that's really interesting there. So I think Brandon Johnson is like a creature of the unions. Like he is an extremely, like he is a believing progressive leftist in the USA. And when you were describing that, you said something that I thought was absolutely fascinating, that like all the data really breaks down, which is that he'll be talking to, or his administration will be talking to working class, mostly Black communities, and almost everything that the Democratic Party leadership is saying is the opposite of what the people want.
Right.
So people will be saying, we need to get these criminals, these D-boys off the block. Let's keep ShotSpotter in place. No, we need to take that away because it's racist.
Right.
You know, we want better teachers, more security in the schools. No, we need to do the exact opposite. I mean, the teacher, somebody said he never gave an F, the mayor. And somebody said he never gave an F as a teacher. Like, I don't even understand how that's possible.
Yep.
Like, I think I'm a pretty good teacher, but you have people that never come to class. Like,
that's a C minus, Will.
What's up?
That's a C minus if they never come to class.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing. Like there are now actually like grading scales that start at 60. So the worst grade you can get is a D plus. Like it's all very bizarre. But I guess my question is, how did that relationship from your perspective as Chicagoan start? Like, do people notice this, that their leaders are doing the exact opposite of everything they want? Are they aware that there are other options? Like, why didn't they vote for Vallis? Like, how does a relationship that dysfunctional get going?
I'm gonna let you go first, Brian, but I have an interesting answer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
Every time I talk to either a Black community or a poor white community in reverse with some of these crazy Republicans in Appalachia, you hear this. Like they not only don't do what I want, they do the exact reverse, and then they lie to me about it. How?
Well, and it's funny because I think the answer is also class, because the Black elite in Chicago is who drives the narrative, but that's only 1 or 2 percentage points of the whole total. And the Black elite of Chicago's views on everything is different than the majority of Black citizens, right? And so, like, give you another example, the Brandon Johnson campaign. I mean, Brandon paid a guy $600,000. So think of this: it was a general election. I mean, it's a primary, so 12 people, whatever. Brandon and Vallis were the last 2, so it was a runoff election. 3 weeks, so it's a 3-week period for campaigning. He gave somebody $600,000 contract to do outreach in the Black community. The guy took the money and left. So think of that. If that outreach would have taken place, Brandon wouldn't be mayor. But we kind of a lot of people don't pay.
You mean Vallis?
Vallis. So Vallis,
Vallis,
would be,
yeah, right.
Vallis would have won. Yeah, Brandon would be mayor.
Him, right.
Right. Vallis would be mayor, which is interesting because I go back and say, well, how did all this happen? How do because I think I see these things at play. We're in Chicago, right? Like, what's the odds? The Black community always asks, how come you don't spend any money in our community? And as soon as a candidate commits $600,000 for 3 weeks, somebody runs off with the money. Now, there's like coincidences. I mean, I guess they are, but it's some of these reasonings to what's behind everything. So it goes back to civic engagement. It's just hard to keep, in this world of news. And I think what happened in that campaign, it was so much foolishness in 3 weeks, the public checked out, black public checked out, and now we end up with Brandon. As we know, if you don't vote, what is it? What is the quote? Somebody had a quote: "If you don't vote, you leave it up to all the stupid people." Something like that, right?
but Brian, what I
Yeah.
think is the last thing of what he said. Well, when he said civic engagement, what I think it is what most of us sane people trying to push back against this nonsense is what. It's our biggest obstacle. It's not even really the left, even though it is. It's not
Right.
the culture changes as much as I talk about it. That's all a problem.
Right.
But the biggest obstacle is that regular people got lives and all this other stuff going on. They're not paying attention. So they don't really get engaged until the plug gets pulled out from under them, until something happens to them, until it hits them in the face. So we were talking about, I got a list of some things that have happened in these cities that we can talk about. But it kind of relates to that in the sense that so Brian and Natasha went to protest at the beginning of the migrant issue in Chicago.
Yeah.
And while they're there, I remember you all were like, hey, there's a protest going on across the street. What are those people protesting? And it ended up being the people who had benefited from Rauner. When Rauner was governor, the one good thing he did was create a voucher program so kids can go to to private schools and use the tax dollars to pay for it.
School choice.
Yeah. Pritzker wanted it gone from day one.
Yeah.
They went down and fought it and it stayed. When he won re-election, he figured he had enough political capital and he was getting rid of it. Well, the people were protesting the end of that program, right? But I'm not saying that they were not passionate about that issue, and it wasn't good that they were protesting. That's a good thing. But I'm saying a lot of people wouldn't complain about that until it was gone, right? So what happens is no one really pays attention to what they're doing. They're not reading the Chicago Sun-Times and all that stuff. Then whenever the crazy decision hits, and whoa, what do you mean I can't drop my kid off? Oh, this is gone. Then they're outraged and then they say something, but then it's too late, right? So a lot of it is that. So at the time during campaign, because I know I would get turned off by all the incessant commercials. And Illinois was one of the worst. I know everybody does it now, but I remember 10, 15 years ago, it was one of my favorite. They basically said Tammy Duckworth ate babies. It was the craziest thing ever. So every time I see a commercial, I'm just like, I'm not listening. I don't care who it was. It's just it's just so extreme and so crazy that you just don't listen to it. So then you find out, Brandon sneak in at night, and now you're like, who's this person that's mayor? And kind of what you end up with. I know you both have mentioned the shot spotter a couple of times, so I want to make sure people know what that is. So you may have it in other cities. It's the technology where they can hear a gunshot, know whether it's a gunshot or not a gunshot, it's a different sound, and help them react faster, and the police get there. And especially in neighborhood, as Brandon Beal, the councilman, said, that even in areas where people are reluctant to call the police, it helps because at least the police knows to go. And so for whatever progressive reason, they decide to scrap it.
They said it's racist.
Yeah, they say it's racist
because it sends the police inadvertently into black communities and they never catch criminals. And so they said it didn't work.
Well, but do they ever think that they would not get sent into the black communities if there weren't guns going off in the black communities? That's the first thing.
This is some of the this is some of the dumbest stuff imaginable. Like the whole argument behind all of this is just like anytime there's a discrepancy between any two groups, the reason is racism.
Yeah.
So like we saw this in the LA Times today when they said there's a disproportionate number of Hispanics getting arrested in Los Angeles. And I mean, I just, you don't want to laugh too much at that, but it's like, well, what are the crime rates?
Right.
I mean, like, it's a large city. There's a well-known Black and Latino gang culture. They make movies about it. It's not that far from the border. Right. So, like, if versus white guys or even black guys, you have X number of Latino criminals, you're going to have more arrests of people in that group. Like, you have to compare the people getting arrested to the population of young men, more of criminal arrests last year or something like that. You can't just say, well, the city's 20% Hispanic. So if you have 35% Hispanic arrests, we're seeing racism. What's the Hispanic crime rate? It's the same thing in Chicago. Like, of the murders last year, how many of the murders were of black people? I would bet more than 80%.
Absolutely.
Like, Easily.
Probably more than 90.
Shit, more than 90, right? Probably 90 or so. Yeah. Now, ShotSpotter is interesting because, if you look at the ShotSpotter data here in Chicago, and I don't know if you guys looked at the stuff at all, but the numbers of shooting. So I look at it a little, we have been under a defund the police since the Laquan McDonald movement anti-police movement, which is the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life, even though I was part of it. I had no idea how deep it was. And we tried to figure out, well, what is this all doing? So now we elected a state's attorney, leftist state's attorney, Kim Fox, who's leaving actually. Then we came with the no cash bail. You put all these things together. All it does is increase crime in Black neighborhoods. That is the only result. You send people back to our communities to commit more crime. And we see it all. But go up ShotSpotter real quick. We watched the ShotSpotter numbers. You're talking about, it started to say in 2020 is when you see the numbers really escalate. So during all the BLM riots, that's what I call them. They riot in our community. So when BLM rioted all through our communities, you see the numbers spike up from 1,500 to about 25 to 3,000. And it's been on a steady incline since 2020. Now, when the migrants came in Chicago in the heavy in 2022, it jumps up another 1,000. So as of now, January 2024 is the highest number of gunshots detected in Chicago since they started in 2016, I think it was. It was 4,021 gunshots. Now, I put that in perspective because we talk about murder rate. So in Chicago, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but it was probably about 700 murders last year. But then you have 5,000 to 6,000 shootings. Right. And the brain says murder is bad. And I say, yeah, but the shootings are bad too because you shot somebody.
Right.
And I think one of the things is for Brandon them to hide those ShotSpotter numbers of gunshots to kind of act like it's not happening, because the last thing you want for the DNC and all the security mindset is to see this spike of ShotSpotter numbers. And I was telling him, if you heard this or not, January was the largest number of shots recorded, January 2024 in Chicago. So I really believe it's kind of playing into all that, the narrative that they want to spin and things along those lines. But from a citizen standpoint, I want to know how many gunshots, how many shootings, and how many murders, and catch all of them. And you got to figure it out. Let me say this on ShotSpotter. It's a personal thing for me. As a matter of fact, I'll probably be in City Hall. One of the aldermen asked me if I come and talk, and I probably will. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna go. My own son got shot in 2019.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Okay, so my own son got shot, walked to the store to get some damn cookies for his brother, right, in the city. And the reason he was saved is because the police came because of ShotSpotter, because nobody called 911. So my own son is saved. I don't know if he died. He survived. He's fine and all that. Right. But ShotSpotter is why the police showed up there to help him. And without ShotSpotter, who knows what would have happened? So now that's just one. But I mean, of course, out of 4,000 in 1 month, I mean, you're talking about, 70,000 gunshots in a year. Right. It has to save lives.
And I want to say 2 points to that. One, you made a good point because you talked about the numbers being high. I never thought about that they may be doing it to kind of hide the shooting numbers. But the other thing is weird is it like Alderman Beal said, give him his credit. Say if it's so bad, why are you waiting to get rid of it? So it's bad. We don't like the technology. It's racist, but we're going to keep it for the DNC, right? We're going to keep it until all that's over. And then we're going to get rid of it later, which is one weird piece about it.
Right.
But it goes back to what the left does. And so that's why when I talk about these issues, I like to talk to my friends and family, and I don't talk about Democrat or Republican. I just say, what do you think about the issue? They tend to sound real conservative then, right?
Right.
So like you said, nobody I talk to says they want, even in the Summer of Love and the defund the police movement, when all the liberals were saying that, nobody I talked to was like, yeah, I don't think we need police. Nobody was saying, no, we shouldn't lock people up, right? So all that no cash bail, ending the cash bail, and letting people out for what they consider nonviolence and not arresting people. Everybody I talked to, no, lock them up. So in New York, our governor, Kathy Hochul, just came in talking about, I'm going to crack down on theft. Well, how exactly is she going to crack down on theft unless they change the rules when the rules currently say you can't lock people up for nonviolent offenses? Right. So if they can shoplift all they want, you just sit there and watch them. Gavin Newsom, if you saw that famously recorded or on a Zoom call saying he was at a Target or a Walmart and some guy walked out with stuff and he's like, look, is that guy's just walking out with stuff? And the cashier, which is funny, he's shocked by it. Why is he shocked? But according to him, and I believe him, the cashier said, yeah, it's the governor's fault. Didn't realize it was him. He says the governor's fault because he lets people steal up to a certain dollar amount of something. And he couldn't connect the dots. He thought it was a good thing for him because he thought it was bad that the guy was stealing. And he said, no, we have the eighth strictest, laws for it. It doesn't matter. Obviously, people don't care because they're stealing. And the average person wants them in jail, right? The same thing you talk about that other protest. Those people wanted that voucher program, and they're like, well, we don't want it. And now Brandon Johnson's, what I say about New York and Chicago is weird because they piggyback from each other. So I talked earlier about how when I left Chicago, they had the little sheets every time they had to write down, and now New York is adopting it. Well, New York, I'm on the school board here, and we were in a battle trying to get the selective schools back to a testing program away from a lottery. And now Chicago is going the other way, and Brandon Johnson wants to get rid of the selective enrollment schools, because there's not enough diversity in the schools, right? So, but when you ask people, they're like, no, I think you should take a test to get into a science school. That makes sense. I think you should dance to get into a dance school. There's nothing wrong with that. But then they all just say, no, that's racist. And like Brian said, they're being like fascists. So everything that people want, they're going against. And yet, there's no one really there to stop them, right? There's no opposition. There's no Republican Party there. So, the only thing you can hope for, I guess, is to get some guy, sensible Democrat to run against them, but then they'll be running against the Chicago machine.
And I'm not as concerned with the machine like that anymore. I mean, CTU built their own machine mechanism. The problem is he just got there. He's less than a year in 3 years.
Yeah.
I don't know where Chicago's going to be staying on this pathway at the end of the day. And of course, you can talk about other stuff. Charles, let me mention one thing you mentioned earlier. When you mentioned how the Republicans or Republican conservative groups came out for the voucher program. So again, this is another failure, in my opinion, of outreach, right? And conversation. They need Black people like us, and it's a lot, as you know, to stand with them for school choice, but they do it on their own, and then they get laughed at and kicked off to the side. But if there was a conversation to bring us together, the Black community can bring that issue to the forefront with Brandon. And we were down there protesting, man. They say this, we have white aldermen that says, Brian, we need you all down here all the time because you say stuff about Brandon that I can't say, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's the way we should be playing it. If there was a true racially class mix to progress that I don't really see as being, we got to keep working on that to make that a true effort. But I do believe there are white, Hispanic, different classes in Chicago, different communities. We've organized with about 5 other neighborhoods. Again, and I don't know if you all see this in New York. New York started out a little bit more ethnically diverse, I believe, and you all correct me if I'm wrong, but in Chicago, Mexican Americans have been here since the 70s. So we have a relationship. It's about 30% Mexican in Chicago. They also feel like we feel like, hey, they're not us. They're coming in, getting the benefits. So it is a mix that's being formed with different alliances saying, hey, we have a common interest, right? So the Mexican American, I laugh, and like you mentioned, I talk about Ados and Friedman and all that, and I laugh with like Alderman Lopez, who's probably the biggest one in the council. Hispanics will have the same issue as we're having because now they're realizing, hey, the largest number of Hispanics are Mexican Americans. And now they're watching people from other countries come in a different way and get, resources that they haven't been able to get because they are really part of America in the same way we are, right? And that's happening in Chicago, bubbling up in these communities. And they put more of the immigrants in their communities. So I really expect, this is where it goes crazy with ShotSpotter and all these conversations, is that this spring and summer is going to probably be off the chain because they've settled in, right? And you got 50-something thousand people settled in, but it's cold. And the people are kind of hiding out. But as the sun and it gets warmer, you're going to see, they're all over. And but it's probably just like that in New York. I know, Charles, you live in different places, but in my neighborhood, no, they're all over the place, right? And when I say all over the place, it is literally all over the place. It's just like something just changed overnight, right? And it's a different scenario there. And you still have the poor Blacks still there, right? And it's just going to be, I think, a bad physical mix coming up going forward. Now, let me say this, and I don't have to talk your ear off and maybe go off script, off subject, but you see what happened today. Yesterday, the mayor and Pedro Martinez, who's the head of Chicago Public Schools, were walking into the shelters, hiring immigrants for CPS, custodial, food service, and teaching jobs. Now think of that. They went into the shelters to get them jobs. Of course, we can't get that same type of outreach to our communities to hire our people for 30 years that we've been asking for, right? And that's where, I'm assuming you all are the same way in New York. The sentiments is just saying, this is just It's not right. It's
Well, I
unheard
just
of.
I think Illinois is the most progressive state because you can even be a police officer if you're
Ah,
illegal there. I mean, you
and it's coming because now they're getting the permit, so they will be policing our communities. It's
I mean,
crazy.
these policies are just batshit insane. I mean, like I think there's a tendency to look at decisions that leaders make, I think,
Yeah.
and kind of have the thought in your mind like this can't be as crazy as it seems. Like the government can't just be maxing out debt like your ex with a credit card. Like there's got to be some kind of plan, some type of scheme that they have. No, they're just $35 trillion in debt. Like I've talked to people at decently high levels in the Federal Reserve, and they're like, no, we don't know what we're doing. It's the same thing here. Like, yeah, of course, if you legalize theft, like if you say you're not going to prosecute people when they walk out of stores with a bag of $1,000 full of makeup and tampons and beauty products and so on, you're going to get a lot of thieves. Like, yes, if you start hiring illegal aliens as cops, you're going to get corrupt third world style cities. And obviously, it's going to annoy people if native born Black or Bosnian American or whatever guys are passed by so someone can hire a guy who's living in a tent after he just walked here from Honduras. These policies are as crazy as they seem. So, yeah, but the real question in the cities is I guess every time I talk to people in Kentucky who are like 80% Caucasian, 20% Black American, ADOS, just regular guys like horse grooms, and they talk about the big American cities like New York, Chicago, even the Ville. Their question is just, how can people be doing this? Like, what would motivate someone to vote for this guy? Like, I was watching one of the times recently when I decided I'm voting Republican for a couple of years was when the Democratic presidential debate went on, and they asked the candidates, who here supports health care for illegal aliens? Yeah, it's like 8 years ago. They still use the old words of like illegal immigrant, illegal alien. I was like, why not? And it was just sort of like, what are you talking about? Have you fallen so far into the pit of this insanity that you won't say no to that? Like, how many of you will say that no women have dicks? Not me. I won't make that type of statement. And I don't really know if I have a point here. I think that you're doing a great job of outlining these policies. The question is just how can you and other community leaders push back against this? And I think we're seeing it a little bit now, but it's yet to be answered. It's going to take cross-class coalitions.
Yes.
Of the kind we haven't. And that another thing about this, like last comment for me, but the problem with that is that a lot of this, I think, is a backlash to cross-class coalitions. Because I remember the Occupy movement and the Tea Party movement in 2012. And one of the things that I'm still pretty radical about, like I was involved in the Occupy movement and people were out there fighting the cops and so on, dressed like ninja warriors. There's actually a really cool scene. But that was completely broken by the beginning of wokeness. Not only were a lot of people arrested, not only was our money frozen, but it was also like you started seeing that stuff sneaking in. You started seeing columns in the papers like, what demand should Black Occupy make of Occupy? And the Tribune, which doesn't normally lean too far left. And I was like, okay, I think the rich man's noticed this. And so the question is like, is that going to happen again? And ever since then, it's been like, the expansion of the rainbow, this sort of stuff, the rights we owe to everyone in the world. And all of those are policies that greatly benefit the elite, unsurprisingly.
Right. And it was built on the back of the Black woke movement of BLM and saying in the last stage of it. So I think
if I could just jump in for 1 second, that was the other thing about BLM. Like when I identify a political opponent in a consulting role or something, I go to their website, I go to their books. I assume both you gentlemen do. I check them out. And the thing about BLM was that from the very beginning, they didn't say anything about Black people. Like I expected them to be to the left of me, but pro-Black. Like we could have debates, whatever. But no, you went to their site. It was like Free Palestine, like all of this, like Black lesbian collective,
lesbian stuff.
Illegal immigrants open the border, and their only thing that was about Black people was about cops shooting criminals less, which I suppose I even agree with under some circumstances. It just not most of them, but that was the very minor point. Point number one is I remember destroy the nuclear family. Point number two is Black feminism. Point three is lesbianism. None of it, whether you agree or disagree with it, had anything to do with what the ordinary Black man would have expected Black Lives Matter to be about. And if you look at how funds were dispersed, when we get into real money, that pattern was followed throughout the movement. I actually tried to track this down once for Spiked UK, and I was able to look at like $170 million of their money. I never found out where most of it went. But like the organizations that got 6- and 7-figure gifts were like For the Girls, which is a travel project for, if I recall correctly, transgender sex workers.
All it's
It was
about.
like all that stuff. It was like art raves and queens. None of it had anything to do. Like guys like Hawk Newsom, who are actually like out in the streets and have come on this pod to argue, like that type, those type of guys, they got nothing. And so I don't think a lot of people know that. And it's actually pretty important.
Yeah. And that goes back to, I think, how we come up politically. You stuck with the Democratic Party, and in Chicago, this deep entrenched machine. So the only other opposition was the left, the political left. People's Lobby, you had Action Now, which was Acorn, the CTU funded organizations started running candidates. So people like myself, we had nowhere else to go, right? So we ended up dealing with the only people fighting daily and Rahm in this system, right? Then you realize, well, hey, that's what happened to me. I said, hey, none of this stuff we talk about is black. So I had to get out of this progressive side, this leftist side, and go on our own. But I think the problem, what you're going to watch is it's an age and class again. Younger millennials, so millennials and down, if you think about it, you get indoctrinated and educated through the school system. Our school system in Chicago has been broken for 30 years when they've been indoctrinating the kids. So they're now voting age, and they push back on their parents and grandparents, right? But now I think you're seeing the Black community start to talk about this in a more public sense, start to push back. So we're going to have to, and look at the tactics they use. Brandon Johnson, Stacey Gates, the head of SEIU, Greg Kelly, they're all Black. So the visual is a Black head, but they're not doing anything for Black. And so you got to fight this cognitive dissonance with Black people. So these are issues that they put on us that we really just have to fight through and organize through issues to ever get through. But again, it's not easy, but we are making headway, I believe. We're picking up a couple of things. They have a Bring Home Chicago ordinance they coming in for homelessness now, right? We don't want that because guess what? It is 100 organizations involved in this, or Bring Home Chicago is raised the real estate transfer tax over $1 million, raise $100 million or some crap for homelessness, right? Well, guess what? It is 100 supporting organizations, 0 Black, 0. And we've tried to get on there just to say, hey, because we know what this is about. So you have a whole Brandon Johnson-led ordinance with no Black supporters on it, but they're gonna push it, and I'm sure you're gonna see the commercials, and you're gonna see Black people cams in the doors, and that's the narrative, and that's part of the problem. Is we also have to fight the spin and the narrative in the media to convince the masses. So it's a lot. It's a task, be clear. And it comes, again, through cognitive dissonance, apathy. You got all this piled on. And Charles mentioned, I think earlier, we were fighting for healthcare and housing and education or whatever that means. And then all of a sudden we wake up one day and a neighbor says, hey, the police are leaving South Shore High School tomorrow. We were like, no, we didn't know. What does that mean? Oh, well, they're moving in legal immigrants. We're like, what? And now here we go, right? The same organizer, here we off tours to fight on the illegal immigrants, right? So, it's a lot, be clear, y'all.
Well, intersectionality was always going to be a problem. Yeah. It was bound to happen. I was always saying it, and now we're there where I was like Will said, oh, we can fix tear down the corporate America, but what are you going to do about the Black people who are going to, you start adding these layers on. But I want to talk about 2 other things real quick.
One of the things, just really briefly, one of the things I don't think a lot of people expected was that Black and Asian men are really near the bottom of the intersectional scale. Yep. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming, like, except for white bros, like we're here. I mean, so there'd be different female and feminist groups, immigrants, LGBT community, like, just there's actually an article that's titled something like "Straight Black Men Are the White Men of the Non-White World" or something like that. So intersectionality, like, if you're an illegal immigrant from Guatemala, background earnings $9,000 a year, you would rank far ahead of any of us here with like a necktie on at a meeting. So the whole point of this is it's not about actual historical harm. It's about current power position. That's the thing. Like, the justification for affirmative action past 40 years isn't American free men were harmed. That would make sense. Maybe throw natives in there. It's diversity's good, and the more hurt you feel, the more diverse you are. So always important to remember that.
Yeah, and I also think that's part of the problem with fighting against it, because too many people get hung up on that piece, right? So I should have, if I thought about it, I would have had the clip. So I had Brian on the show once, and we were talking reparation and Adolfs and all this other stuff. And it's on a conservative talk radio station. So of course people were kind of him and hawing and callers coming in, but they don't get it. I'm like, this is what you need to create a coalition with these people. You think you disagree with them, you disagree with them on that one issue. So we did this lightning round. So I just asked him about all these topical things, and he sounded like a right winger, right? So I'm like, so you're gonna ignore all the people who think like him because he feels he deserves reparations, right? So it's kind of to the point you were just saying, because instead of arguing how they're, especially if they're America first, right? If they're MAGA people, so it's America first. These are your countrymen. And instead of arguing with them because you agree on that thing, you're saying, well, why do we need to have set asides for black? It doesn't matter whether you should have set asides for black or not. The point is the set asides are already there. And to you, you don't like them. So you should be fighting against the set asides. And to the black people, the fact that the set asides are there, but they're no longer black, right? So that you got set asides that you don't want. They want them, but they want them for their group, and they're going to illegals. They're going to trans group. They're going to LGBT community. They go to all these subgroups. It's not going to the people who, if you want to argue, had the harm. So that's the argument to fix it. But you're too busy just saying, "Well, I don't think you should have anything at all," and you like missing the forest for the trees. So that's what I think was the problem with approaching that.
Right.
But
we have 71 schools in CPS that at 71 black schools with 0 third graders meeting the reading requirements to pass.
I got a solution for that, Brian. I got a solution. Because that's
Brandon. So wait, but Brandon gets on TV, quotes those stats and says, but we got all this money for legal immigrant kids to be educated in ESL and language supports and all this shit. And I sit back like, well, shit, can we get some, black language support? Can we create something? Can we do something for the black kids that can't speak English? Also help us out too, help them too. And that's the where it doesn't match. And
I'm just hoping when you said black language support, you mean supporting the black kids so they can read better, not create a new black language. But that's the other thing I wanted.
I would have kept Ebonics though, so people can understand what we're saying. But it's too late for that now. If you ask me, we need our own language like everybody else, so we can talk about people behind their backs.
That would be beneficial.
Everybody else do, right?
But as bad as Will talked about how their policies is just crap, right? Yeah. But their solution, their ideas of solving the stuff is crazy too. Have you seen some of this stuff? Like, did you see the debate the other day? So four Democrats were in a primary debate for a Senate seat in California. And Congresswoman Barbara Lee said, I think the minimum wage should be $50 an hour. Nobody blinked. Yeah, nobody blinked. Yeah. You were just talking about the 71 schools where no one's at grade level. And I say jokingly said they got a solution because all the liberals here in New York tell me, and there that the solution is integration, right? So the one thing we all hated, they don't, Brian, they don't understand. I keep trying to tell them that black people never liked integration. I keep telling them black people they wanted to end segregation. They never wanted integration. It doesn't work. Well, I don't know if you all saw this. I did not send this one to you, but the DC mayor and the DC council is talking about that there's a majority white school and a majority black school, 80% black, failing. Most of them are on welfare, the whole nine. Some of them are homeless. And then you got this school that's 60% white. They want to keep the two schools open, but move all the kids into one school, integrate the school, and then have them go to this school for like 3 years, and then all the kids go to the other school for the other years. Figuring that the way to help the black kids is to put them around the white kids because it rubs off. This is what they talk about. I got yelled at a board meeting here because they were like, I don't understand. I don't care about black kids because you're telling me the school is successful, but it's not successful because there's not enough black kids in it. We need to bring the black kids. We need to get rid of zone neighborhood geography and go with a lottery so we can bring black kids from all over the city so we can have more black kids go. Why don't you just fix the schools they're in? Shut up, racist. That's what they told me.
Well, that's the same thing they talk about me and to your point when they getting rid of selective enrollment. So, you had all these neighborhood schools, and just like we went, you had smart kids, everybody in the middle, you had slower kids in the grammar school. It all worked together. You kind of pushed on each other. So once they took all the black teachers out of CPS, then they created selective enrollment, and all that did is took the best and the brightest black kids, put them over here in this school, brought more gangs and stuff and problems into the neighborhood schools, fail. And here we are today with shooters and unengaged people.
And then you have fewer
people.
kids, so you don't need as
And you
many
got fewer
teachers. So you
kids.
fire the black teachers.
Right. And now the Chicago Teachers Union, it went from 80% black to 80% white and Hispanic. And that's who teaches the kids. Yeah. And so they keep this 80% white and Hispanic right now. And now a little flip side, some more numbers about CPS, which is crazier because Charles knows I'm pretty vocal about these issues because it's what I believe are truths. You also have 44% of principals in Chicago public schools are black, of which 98% of them are black women. And a lot of them are AKAs, and a lot of them are these feminists and this other shit, right? So you add that, they don't, and it's true. It sounds like because but look, they don't have a lot of children themselves, right? And they really don't like the poor black kids. So how are you a black woman principal of some of those 71 schools when none of the kids can read? Like, how does this make any sense in any world that I live in? It doesn't, but it's the world that we all dealing in, but it's not. And I want to say one more thing before you mentioned some stuff from these primaries. We watched Joe Biden in the presidential debate in 2020. He was asked, Buttigieg was asked about reparations. Joe Biden, if you go back and look at that clip, Joe Biden said, "Oh, it's great. I get to answer this question." He started on a tangent, yelling and screaming how the immigrants built the country. They're on their way here, and they're the future of the country. Get used to it. That was his answer to reparations. Now, is it a coincidence that he wins and opens the borders up, floods the country? So I always believe that these are plans set out by different people, and there's ways to move them. I do think like that because you see these long-term moves that cause this other move. So I do believe that this has been a strategy. You all know I like Roy Beck and the books about immigration and the 200-year expose. And when you look at it like that, we're just seeing another wave of immigration for a particular purpose. I don't know if it's for voting. I don't know if it's to destroy our communities, to replace us, to expedite the removal of black people, especially in Chicago, because South Shore, where I live, so real quick, most of the immigrants are sitting. This is an interesting point too. You got Bronzeville, you got Woodlawn, and you got South Shore. Each have been inundated and with shelters in those communities. Well, what is it surrounding? The Obama Center. So I think, it sounds conspiratorial, but you are making more crimes in these communities today, I think, to clear them out. So when Obama and them start throwing galas, it's a clear little walk. They could drink their lemonade.
I thought they just wanted to give black businesses food contracts.
Damn food.
Is that what he said? He said, all the black companies are feeding them. Right. So you all should be happy with that.
$154 million in food contracts to Buena Beef and a place called 14 Parish. 14 Parish is in Hyde Park. It can probably sit 40 people. I'm going to be interested to know how you take a 40-person restaurant, if 40, and you go serve 3,000 meals a day for migrants. Because it's just that's another washing of the money. To be clear, it's not going to feed everybody. And not to mention, they get $500 a month link card from the state, right? I don't get free meals from the city of Chicago. I want some of that meal too. Shit.
Well, you should probably leave the country
because you're not a bum. I mean, if you're an adult man, you don't.
But you know what I'm saying. But why you're providing fresh food choices to illegal immigrants when nobody else has that choice? There's no hot meals for any Americans, right?
One thing that's kind of important there, though, like I actually got caught up in this myself. Like there was a lot of reporting that Brandon Johnson was illegally using all minority-owned companies to feed the illegal immigrants. And that I actually said this on Twitter, but that turned out not to really be true. Like, so the headline was $17 million given to black-owned businesses to feed illegals, but the total amount of money that was given to feed the illegals was like $300 million or something like this. Yeah. So the biggest, it was an edited headline. The biggest payout was to Buona Beef. I think Portillo's got some money. And so they were just bringing in trucks full of like kind of fast, casual food to these guys. So worth a note.
And I just want to get on.
And what you could have done is you just built a big food called a hatchery. So if you look up the hatcheries is a food incubator place with cooking kitchens and all that. You know what you could have done? You could have got the STEM chef program students out of CPS and cooked the damn food and let them come in there and eat it. But you didn't do that. You gave $300 million of contract. So let me say, we also see so first of all, their administration is not transparent. So we don't have the full ledgers of where all this money has been spent, what it's been spent on, and who's getting it. The only thing we know, they spent $90 million on a staffing agency from Kansas City. Now, you ain't gonna convince me that staffing company is not providing help to other people somewhere. It makes no damn sense. Why did you go to Kansas City to get a staffing company that charges us like $50 or $60 per custodian? Hell, let me just pay him $20 right here. You know what I mean? Where's the 40 going? So it's a lot of grift and theft going on. It'll come out eventually, but they are hiding the record. So we don't have access, neither do any news outlets, to the true accurate accounting of what's going on with all that money. And I want to say one more thing, Charles, on this money. I'm talking about this money, if you don't mind.
All right, make it quick.
We just found out 29. They only spent 29% of the ARA fund so far. So Chicago is sitting on like 600 million of unspent ARA funds as of today, on top of all this. So it's a lot, you all. I don't know where you are in New York with that, but they have all this unspent money. They're using it to balance their budgets. Yeah, you know what I mean, which is not what it's supposed to be for. But.
Well, Will, I would like to give you the last word if you have any thought, but I just want to go on record, and I will even speak for Will here and say that Will and I are not the ones that said AKAs are a bunch of elitist women who are educated, who don't like Black people and don't have kids. We were the two of the three who did not say that. Let me just be on record. We did not say that.
Don't want to get pursued by the K-Hive for like a week.
You can
make jokes about that, like, no, that's the Zetas. But no, I mean, like, no, I don't have any hate for any of the Divine Nine, really. But no, I mean, I actually think that one point that Brian made that's really important throughout this is the distinction between kind of class and race. And that keeps coming up over and over. So like whether or not they're AKAs or Deltas or GDIs, the principals in Chicago and New York public schools are very often from the Black elite.
Right.
And I mean, that's very different from being from the hood.
Right.
So they're two different narratives, and a lot of white Americans, without being offensive, don't know how different that is. Absolutely. So there are two different storylines that are kind of in operation here. Absolutely. So most upper middle class Black people that are conventional liberals have been taught this view of the world where the one explanatory variable behind everything that happens is kind of white opponents from their same social class. It's like hidden racism somewhere. And so the root cause of crime is like some kind of subtle racism. Why do Black kids get such poor marks in school? It's not because dad's not there. It's not because they study even less than the white kids. It's not because of XYZ, drinking, hooking up in school. It's because teachers look at them and judge them or whatever it's supposed to be.
Or their books are racist. Right.
Yeah, everyone's racist. All books are racist. Yeah. The math SAT is racially prejudiced. Right. Like we've all heard this. Literally every time you date or talk to, in particular, an upper middle class Black woman, you do sometimes hear this. There's no hate in that statement. It's a very common theory. Yeah. So when you talk to ordinary Black people and ordinary poor white people as well, no one believes this. Right. It's very easy to watch the million hit videos of Chicago that came out during like the old Black Tukaville War and say like, oh, this is the actual problem. These guys are waving rocket launchers at each other. Right. Like we see what we can do to clean up these neighborhoods. Right. So I guess like if there's a reason for this, it's probably a difference in goals. So for the Black upper class, like maintaining affirmative action designed to fight racism is the basis of all your economic stability. Right. It's what gives you a slight but real edge over an equally rich white guy. Right. It means a lot for you that this be true, even though it's not. Right. And for everyone else, you just want to walk to school without getting shot in the ass. Right. So there's this huge split, and it's really important, actually, that we work through it, Black people and allies and every other community. So it's interesting to hear you break that down, like from the ground level. Like we all know what the problem is, but you absolutely can't mention it. So it's really problematic.
Yeah, and I'm a big in this reparations, ADOS, Friedman type mindset and movement, and it's a new conversation for everyone, Black and white, right? So this is just another piece to that conversational puzzle to explain, and I do it all the time. When I talk to whites, I'm like, let me explain this to you, what you're seeing, what you don't really grasp. You see these Blacks up here, but do you notice they're by themselves? There's 4 or 5 of them, and they're not with everybody. You see the pastors, you see these groups, but it's not the sentiment of the masses of Black people. But I think that's being broken down because we now have a voice, or we can now show an alternative conversation. And that's what I like social media. And we got to do a better job of being consistent in that. So stay on message and stay on point, and keep going forward. But I think it's definitely a conversation America needs. We all need to have this. So people, I talk to, when I'm in Springfield and I talk to state reps and senators, the white ones, the Republicans, they say, Brian, all I know is every year we vote on billions of dollars to send y'all ass in Chicago. So we don't know what's going on. And I say, hey, you do. But then these not-for-profits come in and take all the money, and it never gets to these kids or to our communities. And you all need to help us, because the other side, I'm talking about the Democrats, they're okay with it. It's their friends. It's what they do. And so these are other gaps in these conversations that we're trying to, bring these honest conversations.
And those are probably sweetheart deals, and they don't care because they're getting part of the money.
Yeah.
They're getting campaign funds, they're getting help and all that kind of stuff. And those people down there have no idea. So there is a disconnect, and hopefully you can bridge that gap. Well, we have to leave it there. He's Brian Mullins from the Black Community Collaborative. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. All right, guys. Talk to you soon.
From you commies who let know you can't fuck with me. I got a country to save. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.